In this mini lecture, we're going to talk briefly about the issue of human cloning, and in particular, human reproductive cloning. So the part 3 of our book, Contemporary Debates in Bioethics, frames the target question this way. Were it physically safe, would human reproductive cloning be acceptable? So let me start by defining a few terms the way they do. Cloning is, as they put it, the process whereby a genetically identical copy, the clone, of some biological entity is produced. These entities including genes, cells, tissues, and even entire organisms. So the importance here is that cloning is a process, and entities are individuals of different types, whether it's genes or cells or what have you. And so the target question focuses on reproductive cloning, which is a particular type of such cloning. So the editors talk about how 3 types of cloning can be distinguished as follows. Gene cloning, or DNA cloning, would be that concerned with producing cloned segments of DNA or copies of genes. So-called therapeutic cloning primarily would be concerned with producing cloned embryonic stem cells, which can be used to create tissues so as to ultimately treat an injury or disease. And then so-called reproductive cloning is concerned with producing a cloned genetic duplicate of an existing organism. So the reproductive cloning that they have in mind here is widely condemned. A number of people, including scientific and medical professionals, as they point out, view reproductive human cloning as immoral. They discuss this in some detail, talking about the number of types of groups and countries that have put some sort of ban upon human reproductive cloning. But why? Well, as they point out, one of the most common reasons why reproductive cloning is thought to be immoral, in fact, they say it's the most common argument against it when it comes to cloning done in animal populations, is used by research professionals and policymakers and laypersons alike. It's what's sometimes called a slippery slope argument. And the way they frame this is that a reproductive cloning of animals will lead directly to the reproductive cloning of humans. So this would be a reason why people would not want to even engage in reproductive cloning of dogs or sheep, is because they're afraid that if you allow that in Nebraska or California or wherever, then you're going to slowly or perhaps quickly go down the slope further to cloning humans. And that's supposed to be the destination that you do not want to reach. And so it's called a slippery slope to emphasize the idea that it's not just a slope that has a certain incline or rather decline to it, but rather it's a slippery slope. It's a path that has a decline to it, and once you take one step on the path, it's hard to not slide further down. Whether you slide all the way to the bottom really fast, or whether you just slide a little bit farther than you intended. The idea is it's a slippery slope. Now, let me talk just a moment about the 2 authors in this section. They introduced the first one, Katrien Devolver, by talking about how she's going to devote a lot of her chapter to trying to refute claims against reproductive human cloning. So in terms of the target question, were it physically safe, would human reproductive cloning be acceptable? Devolver is going to say yes, it would be. However, Devolver is going to argue that human reproductive cloning should be allowed for the primary reason that it will allow infertile people to have a genetically related child. There's numbers of people who are not able to have a genetically related child through normal reproductive channels and even through some of the assisted reproductive channels like in vitro fertilization. And so it will allow some people to have a genetically related child who would not otherwise have a genetically related child. Second author in the section, named Stephen Levick, is going to say that besides the safety issues that are associated with human reproductive cloning, there's a number of concerns about the psychological well-being and the social well-being of a clone. So there's worries about what a cloned individual would feel like when they grow up and realize that, hey, I was created just to look like my genetic parent or my genetic sibling, however you want to classify the initial individual. The cloned individual may have certain kinds of social problems and psychological problems with realizing that they are a clone. And Levick is going to emphasize those, among other things, in his case. So this should get us off to a good start in our discussion of human cloning and its ethics.